Hello everyone, welcome back. So buckle up y'all because this is going to be a doozy of an episode today. We're going to be talking about everything that just went down in Venezuela with Maduro, but of course we're going to be looking at it from the esoteric and occult perspective because that's what we do here. And of course, any of these operations that we see that play out in the media, I'm always looking at it through the lens of spiritual warfare because it seems like that's just about everything these days, right? Everything's a ritual, everything has some sort of occult underpinning. And there are a lot of parallels between what's happening right now in Venezuela and what happened back in 2004 in Iraq, right? So, of course, on the surface in Iraq, we were talking about oil and resources and freedom and weapons of mass destruction, right? The same things that we're talking about here. But then under the surface, all the weirdos like us are aware of the fact that they were really looking for relics, right? That there were some sort of Sumerian relics that they were very interested in. We've all heard about the giants of Afghanistan and that whole Mishigots, right? And I believe that the same thing is playing out here in Venezuela. So I had done a reading on Saturday that I didn't upload because it was just so out of left field that I it didn't make sense to me and I thought that it was crazy. And as time goes on and I start watching the media and the news coverage unfold, I'm like, wait a second, I think that there's actually something here. And what the reading was talking about was the black cube, right? So the black cube, of course, is that thing that's associated with the cult of Saturn. They think that it's some sort of tech. It would be associated with, the more restrictive aspects of the Matrix, right? The very matrixy aspects of the Matrix. And effectively, what was coming through was that the reason why they destroyed Chavez's mausoleum during that operation is because there was some sort of spiritual tech there that needed to be destroyed. That was like the critical aspect of the operation, right? That it's like Maduro was just the surface, but the really important aspect of it was destroying what was ever in that mausoleum. And again, it kept coming back to the black cube. And as I continued the reading, the other analogy that was coming through was from the movie Assassin's Creed, which is based on the video game Assassin's Creed. But in the movie, the relic that they were looking for was this thing that was called the Apple of Eden. And the Apple of Eden was like this golden orb that contained, I think it was like the original DNA strand of mankind, right? So if you want to think like Adam and Eve, right? It would be like Adam and Eve's DNA that all of us kind of emanate from. And if I remember correctly, I think the plot of this movie was that some sort of bad guy wanted that apple because if they had that genetic sequence, then they could effectively control or manipulate all of mankind, right? Because that was like the source code, so to speak. The other thing that was coming up in this reading is the concept of the ancient giant trees, right? The mythical giant trees, just like in the movie Avatar, right? That they had those magical trees that they lived inside of. And Venezuela has the most famous one, which is the Table Mesa. And the Table Mesa, that's the one where the Angel Falls is, right? So Angel Falls is the tallest waterfall on Earth, but it has a very interesting name, right? Angel Falls, Fallen Angels. And then when it comes to the context of the giant trees, the only real historical precedent that we have for that concept would come from the Book of Enoch, where they say that the giant trees were cut down by the fallen angels. Angel Falls, giant trees, Apple of Eden, right? So another thing that's interesting is that many moons ago I had gone down a rabbit hole where apparently while Chavez was in power, one of the things that he did was protect the indigenous people's DNA. I don't know if I'm articulating that properly, but it was like something was codified in law that their DNA was constitutionally protected and that it couldn't be exploited by other agencies or something like that, which I think is very interesting. What's also interesting is that the indigenous peoples of Venezuela that live near the Table Mesa believe that it was an ancient giant tree, right? That's part of their mythology. And part of the mythology is that some sort of psychopathic entity showed up, a fallen angel, whatever, Nephilim, something like it, and basically cut down the tree because it wanted the fruits of the tree, right? So the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil or whatever it may be. but then again, the apple of Eden, right? And of course, right now we're talking about resources, oil, gold, yada, yada, yada. But it's like something inside of me is like there is a spiritual resource there. And I think that there's some sort of as above, so below, where it's like where there's a presence of massive amounts of oil and gold, there is also a presence of some other type of spiritual resource. I don't know what that is, but I think of it again like the movie Avatar, that it's like in Avatar, they had those giant trees that they lived inside of, and underneath the tree was the largest source of whatever mineral it was that they were looking for in that movie. I think they called it unobtainium or something like that. But the tree had the largest source of that. And I believe that one of the reasons why Venezuela is hyper rich in these resources is because there used to be an ancient tree there or because there's something else there, right? So when I think of oil, I think of this substance that the alchemists used to talk about, what they called the prima materia, or the prime matter that all other matter is made from. So prima materia, pre-materia, another word for it would be prima donna, right? The prime matter, prime mother. And, you know, the idea that the oil is the lifeblood of the earth is a very popular concept, right? But again, the alchemists were saying that this was the substance that you would use to create the philosopher's stone, right? So the philosopher's stone would be that magical substance or whatever that you could turn lead into gold with. You could use it for immortality. God knows what you could use it for. But the 101 on the premateria, according to the alchemists, was that it was black and a rainbow, right? So crude oil is black and it has that rainbow shimmer, right? It was also a stone, a liquid, and a gas, just like natural crude oil is, right? It was also a substance that could be made into anything, right? So look at the world around us. This is all made of oil, right? This is made of oil, right? Half my face is made of oil at this point. Like everything in our world is made of oil. So to me, it just checks out that oil is most likely the premateria, right? And I know that oil only shows up in the public record in like the early 1900s when they start processing it. But let's be fair, it's like if I'm going to believe that, you know, pioneers in Texas would just, you know, stick a shovel in the ground and all of a sudden oil is shooting out of it. It's like that had to have been happening since day one of humanity, right? It's not like it all of a sudden just started coming to the surface in the 1900s, right? It's like it's always been there. But what did they refer to it as in the ancient world? Well, I think they referred to it as the premateria, right? So it seems like Venezuela has a lot of access to the premateria, which would imply to me that it's some sort of root node in the matrix, right? And the black cube cult, that whole thing is very Saturnian. Oil, because of its underground root node, because of the blackness of it, right? Saturnian things are very black. It's like that would be very Saturnian in and of itself. And another thing that I believe is that the ancient trees would have been like the neural network of the before times, right? Of if you want to say before the fall and after the fall, right? That it's like the ancient trees were like the neural network of the world before the fall, and then the black cube would have been like the supplementary tech that was installed after the fall to kind of replace it, right? And it would make sense to me that you would replace it where the tree used to be, right? So another interesting thing is like, think of the black cube in Mecca, right? So first of all, Saudi Arabia, very rich in oil, right? So there's something there. But then also the black cube in Mecca is believed, at least by the Arab cultures and the Islamic cultures, to be an axis mundi point, right? So the axis mundi is believed to be one of the navels of the earth, right? I think there's a few axis mundis. I don't think there's just one. But the axis mundi is supposed to be like a point where heaven and earth kind of connect, so to speak, and everything revolves around it. The ancient trees were also believed to be axis mundi points, right? So think of the Norse cultures and Yggdrasil, the giant tree, right? That was literally the axis mundi. So I believe that there's a few axis mundis, and one of them I believe is Venezuela. And that's why I believe that this place is so critically important. Beyond the oil, I also think that gold is most likely a signifier of one of these axis mundi points, right? Considering not just the monetary value of gold, but like the electrical applications of gold, right? How it's a really powerful conductor of currents, right? That we use gold for currency, I think is interesting, but also in terms of electronic wiring, especially for sound and audio and things like that, that gold is the best, right? There's nothing better than that. And I would imagine that if there's a tremendous amount of gold in the earth, then it must have some sort of conductive properties, right? Where it's processing information the same way that a wire would, right? So all of that leads me to believe that, again, that there's some sort of very powerful spiritual resource that is there, right? So as I was saying in the beginning of the video, I believe that the destruction of Chavez's mausoleum was the most critical aspect of whatever it was that happened this weekend, because that had something to do with, for lack of a better term, a hex that was placed over that land, right? So in 3D terms, as above, so below, I believe that things like sanctions, right, if you're going to sanction a nation, sanctions are effectively hexes, right? But sanctions are also very Saturnian. And everything that we've seen play out in Venezuela in the last couple of decades is very Saturnian, right? Because modern Saturnian concepts are associated with restriction, right? Very tight, heavy restriction, right? It's impossible to move, it's impossible to move up, it's impossible to accumulate wealth. Pasta costs $10,000, right? It's like all of that would be very, very hyper Saturnian. Excuse me. And in terms of Chavez the magician and the mausoleum, my understanding of magical operations is that once the operator is taken out of the equation, whatever magic they're associated with starts to break down, right? So Chavez would be the sorcerer that created Chavismo or whatever, created the egregore, created the tulpa or the thought form or whatever it was that effectively protected him and allowed him to gain power, but at the consequence of like hexing the land. I don't know how else to say it, but it's like I do believe, I would imagine that it's like he was probably possessed by something, right? Some sort of spirit, right? Like the same thing that would have possessed Lenin or possessed Mao or possessed any of those entities. Now, what's interesting about Lenin and Mao is that as Chavez was reaching the end of his life, he became fascinated with their burial rituals, right? So both Lenin and Mao were embalmed and then placed in a tomb. And he wanted to be buried the same way. Now, at least with Mao, it seemed like Mao was very good at extending his magic after death, right? That it's like that system is still somewhat stable, right? That everything that was put into place there is still very much so active in a continuation of what he was doing. As opposed to here in Venezuela, it seemed like it all started breaking down almost immediately, right? As though nobody could really continue the magical operation in the same way. But the consequence of it was that it was hexing this node point, right? That it's like the hex on the land was tied into the egregore of Chavismo or whatever it was. And it's interesting because it's like it kind of parallels the Roman culture where when Romans would move in and colonize a particular area, they would do the same thing where it was, destroying the mausoleums or defacing the different gods or deactivating these different thought forms, right? Because it was almost like there's the psychological deactivation, right? Because it's like if you're worshiping this figure as a god and then all of a sudden you see that figure's mausoleum destroyed, that kind of implies that your god has been destroyed, right? But then quite literally, it's like if you believe this stuff, even as the colonizer and the invader, then you're trying to deactivate that thought form, and it's kind of like the only way to do it is to destroy, the mausoleum or whatever. So again, it's like everything keeps telling me in this reading that it's like there's some sort of tech or whatever that was either in the mausoleum or corresponded to it or underneath it or God knows what. But again, it was like the best example of the relic that I could think of was that apple of Eden from the Assassin's Creed movies, which again corresponded to like the baseline source code DNA of humanity or something like that. And then again, like I was saying, it was like it seemed like they recognized that the indigenous people's DNA there in Venezuela was very, very valuable, right? Right now, I think that there are a lot of DNA wars that are happening, right? We know that Jeffrey Epstein was very interested in DNA, that he had a DNA bank called Southern Trust, that once he got out of jail in, what was that, 2013 or whatever, I think that's when he opened Southern Trust. And it looks like a bank, but the only thing they were banking was genetic data, right? So 23andMe, Ancestry.com, those kinds of things. He was also a big investor in CRISPR. We also know about his freaky eugenics experiments and all of that, right? But it's like, this is one guy that was doing that operation basically on his own because he was trying to emulate somebody else. We don't know exactly who he was trying to emulate, but it's like he was trying to copy someone else's homework, effectively, is what it looks like. Now, my question is, what did they want with the DNA? So the other aspect of the reading was that it looked as though the Maduro regime knew that they were sitting on this resource. They knew that they had it, but they didn't know what to do with it or how to utilize it or anything like that. So it also kind of looks like they were trying to sell it on the black market, but any of the black market operators that were aware of it came to the conclusion that they would rather destroy it than see anybody have it, right? That's effectively what the cards were showing me, that it was almost like, I don't think we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant or anything like that, but let's just use that as an analogy. It's like, imagine if somebody had the Ark of the Covenant and was trying to sell it on the black market to God knows who, China, Russia, whatever, pick a boogeyman, and the boogeyman get together and decide that they would rather destroy the Ark than let anybody have it because none of them actually know how to use it, and it's just more drama than it's worth, right? Something like that. Now, in the last couple of days since I recorded all of this and decided not to upload it, I've been seeing more and more people post similar things like this, particularly that back in, I believe it was 2023, so like 2 or 3 years ago, they found something in Venezuela that looked like an ancient uncontracted culture or tribe or some sort of archaeological site. And shortly after that archaeological site was discovered, Maduro locked down that entire area. Another thing that kept coming to mind with all of this is the number of stories that have come out in the last couple of years about indigenous peoples in the Amazon that have been like terrorized by this entity that they refer to as the face snatchers, right? And what the face snatchers seem to be are they have American accents, they show up on hoverboards, they're wearing head to toe black SWAT gear, and they would effectively kidnap the indigenous people and cut their faces off, right? So the indigenous people would find the kidnapped person in the woods missing their face, right? So God only knows what kind of horrific human experiments were happening there, but I think it's one of those things that it's like it's not even worth speculating on because it's so horrific, but it's like it's all the usual suspects, right? It's like we know what the Chinese are doing with the Falun Gong, right? And we know that the Chinese are very involved in Venezuela, right? We know that our own CIA has been doing things, right? But one thing that I want to point out about the CIA is that the CIA is basically like a host body that is fully infected with cancerous parasites, right? And these cancerous parasites are effectively autonomous and like hiding within the body of the CIA, but it's like, I don't think the CIA even knows what's happening within its own agency, right? That it's like, it's so decompartmentalized and shrouded in secrecy and yada yada that it's like, there's just rogue parasitic factions within it, right? So it's like, it doesn't mean that it's sanctioned by anybody. It's like the people that could have sanctioned these operations could have died decades ago, right? But the operation is still running. Just like the same idea as like a magical egregore being created by an operator or a magician that then dies and then the egregore just goes rogue, right? I think that that is effectively what the CIA is plagued with right now. Now, As a result of whatever it was that happened this weekend, I believe that it's like the hex that was placed over the land has deactivated, because that hex was emanating from Chavez, was emanating from his mausoleum, was emanating from his corpse, was emanating from his thought form, whatever it may be. Because one of the main questions that I had was that it was like, how does taking Maduro out of the equation change anything, right? It's one man, right? It's like you're going to tell me that they couldn't just put another psychopath in power. Like you're going to tell me that he really had any kind of power, right? It's like typically the tyrant is only as good as the oligarchs that allow the tyrant to be a tyrant, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, everybody's replaceable, as they say. So how does this really change anything? And it's like, I think what it effectively signals is it's the ritual of it all, right? Because it's like what this implies is that the protection magic is no longer in place, that the protection magic has completely deactivated, right? And now it's like the entire thing is openly vulnerable. And that's kind of like the true power of a hex, right? Is that it's like you can't really be hexed unless somebody tells you that they've hexed you and you believe it, right? So think of like the context of like living in a village in the Middle Ages, in the medieval times, when you're hyper superstitious and you believe in witches and you believe in the devil and you believe in witchcraft and all of that, right? And there's some, some old lady with a mean face that, always had a problem with you. And something happens, and it's like that lady puts the Malorkia on you, whatever they used to call it back in the day. She puts the evil eye on you. And you believe that she has the power to do that. And the next thing you know, you start unraveling and going into your own psychosis and yada yada. It's like the hex only works because you believe that it's working, right? It's like you believe that the entity that hexed you had the power to hex you. You believe that you've been infected by this agent, whatever it may be, right? And that's how the hex works. Everything that just played out this weekend basically let everybody in that regime know that they've been hexed, if that makes sense. And that the hex has kind of flipped because, again, it's like Chavez, Chavismo, all of that, it hexed the land, right? The land was the thing that got affected by the sanctions. The land was the thing that was pillaged by that regime. The people that are connected to the land are the ones that suffered the most. Chavez didn't suffer. He died fat. You know what I'm saying? Everybody else is starving. He died fat and full of McDonald's, okay? Chavez never went a day without a meal, right? He died covered in gold and diamonds. Every single one of them are living the same life, right? In terms of that regime, right? Whatever entity is in power still. And it's like, I think he had a very similar kind of magic to either Donald Trump or the same kind of magic that we would see in Aleister Crowley, right? Where it was like Aleister Crowley loved to be hated because he fed off of the hatred and the fear that was projected towards him. So he was the one that told the media to refer to him as the Great Beast 666 or the Antichrist or the wickedest man alive. It's like he called himself that because he wanted to basically feed off of that energy. It's like the more feared he was, the more powerful he became. I see the same kind of magic playing out with Donald Trump, where it's like, it seems like he just thrives off of the fact that half of the world thinks that he's the Antichrist, right? And that's like the magic of the Antichrist too, is that it's like half the world also needs to think that you're their savior, right? Because if you read the book and the script according to the Antichrist, it's like he's quite a beloved figure by half the population. It's the other half that thinks that he's evil. So I think that Chavez had a very similar kind of magic where it was like he had no problem being hated and feared because he was feeding off of that, right? All of the other parasites that were feeding off of that regime were feeding off of that. And as a result, it was like it didn't matter what was projected upon them because it would only stick to the land. It would only stick to the people of Venezuela. It wouldn't actually stick to that upper class. Now that this entire operation is played out, it's like, I don't know if you saw the swearing in ceremony of whoever it is, the replacement, but it's like they're all shaken. They are shooketh, right? But Maduro, Maduro does not seem shook. I'll tell you, the cards that I kept pulling for him, it was Three of Cups, Celebration, Cahoots, right? There's something up where it's like he looks dumb, right? He gives dumb. He has a very like there's not much intelligence behind the eyes there, but I think he played a very smart game. And I think it's very interesting that of all the places that he wound up in the Southern District of New York. Because the Southern District of New York, that's where Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, that's where Harvey Weinstein was prosecuted, that's where Diddy got processed through, that's where R. Kelly got processed through, it's where Luigi Mangione got processed through. It's like all of the big names in the last couple of years, but especially Epstein, Weinstein, Diddy, R. Kelly. When I look at that, what I see is one intelligence agency stealing blackmail from another intelligence agency, right? Because we know Epstein, Weinstein, Diddy, R. Kelly, they were all running honeypots, right? They were all collecting blackmail. What happened to that blackmail, right? I think that it was all collected. I think that a different agency, excuse me, collected all of their blackmail because let's face it, look at all of those trials. None of those people were on trial for the things that they should have been on trial for. It was kangaroo court, right? It's like even Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. It's like, I forget what she was arrested for, but it's like compared to what we know she did, it was nothing, right? Excuse me. So it seems like when the blackmail is being handed over to someone else, the place that that is processed through seems to be the Southern District of New York, right? I don't know why, but that just seems to be where all of the blackmail is collected and absorbed by some other agency, which one could assume at this point is probably whatever faction of the Illuminati Donald Trump is associated with. I don't know what that would be, but it's not the same one as the Epstein people, I'll tell you that much. And I don't think it's the same one as the Diddy people, and I don't think it's the same one. I think that there were many, many, many different mafias or cartels or cabals that were all kind of playing the game of life with each other. I don't know how else to say it, but it will be very interesting to see how things play out. But again, it's like I believe that the hex that was placed over that land has been lifted. And whatever spiritual resource was tangled up in that is also lifted. And when I was doing this reading yesterday and I got the ocular migraine as I was looking into it, I wondered if it was because there's just so much energy that's now surging out of this place that it's going to like change the landscape in some way, shape, or form. Because again, it gives the energy of like root node, right? Like the baseline, the base code of reality or something like that is entangled with particularly the table mesa, right? It's like I know that that's where Paradise Lost is based on the table mesa. There's a mountain chain in there that's referred to as the Lost World Mountains, right? The Lost World Mountains is also where they found the archaeological site back in 2023 that Maduro then shut down, right? So there's something there. There's something big there. It almost gives me the vibe of like a Wakanda type of situation, right? Like Wakanda in the Black Panther movies is like an out of phase space, right? Where it's almost like a breakaway civilization that's shielded by some sort of force field or something like that. It's like it has that flavor of energy on top of it. But again, the genetic source code of it all, right? Because another thing is that it's like I know human beings have their own genes and genomes, but gold also has a genetic profile, right? Where it's like they could take your gold necklace and figure out exactly what mine it came from based on that gold's unique signature. I don't even understand how that's possible, but it's like apparently gold has its own genetic profile, right? So I have to wonder, right? Because it's like all of these resources and minerals that they talk about there, they're still in the earth, right? It's like they haven't touched any of it, right? Maybe they've scratched the surface of it, but again, I'm quick to think that all of that is a red herring for something else, right? That there's some other spiritual resource, whatever it may be, right? And it's like, especially within the context of AI, it's like, it seems like a lot of these minerals are things that they're feeding to the AI, right? It's like The pillaging of the Congo is feeding the AI. The idea that we need to annex Greenland and Canada has to do with AI and the resources that are there. So who knows what they actually need. But actually, I'll leave it on this, is that another interesting thing that I was seeing this weekend, where somebody was talking about the parallels between Iraq and Venezuela and the occult esoteric relics that they're looking for, is that this person was trying to argue that something was found in Iraq that they knew was there, that they were looking for, but they found something that effectively is the thing that's allowed them to create AI. I'm trying to think of how to say this, but it's like, we know that the Sumerians were highly adept mathematicians, right? That they were very good at their math. And they have all of these stone tablets that have all of these mathematical equations written on it. And it sounded something like that, where it was like they knew that the code, the math, whatever it was that's required to build these large language models or these, artificial general intelligence systems, that something they found in Sumeria or in Iraq was the puzzle piece that they needed to build this machine, right? And it almost makes you wonder if another one of those puzzle pieces is in Venezuela. And now, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about the mythology of Osiris, right? Where it's like Osiris kind of represents the system before the fall, right? Osiris is associated with trees, right? Specifically, the tall cedar of Lebanon tree, which would be Lebanon's version of the ancient Yggdrasil world tree, axis mundi thing that we're talking about. But Osiris was very much so associated with evergreen trees in general, right? And then he gets splintered and scattered, right, by Set. And then Isis has to go around and collect all of these different pieces, right? Well, how funny is it that Isis was in Iraq, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if there's an ISIS connection to Venezuela. I'm sure I could find some sort of article somewhere where they say that he was funding them, right? I know that they think that he was funding Hamas or Hezbollah or something like that, but either which way, I have to wonder if the mythology of Isis going around and collecting the pieces of Osiris to rebuild him and create the Horus is the same script as collecting all of these ancient relics so that they can build an AI that ushers in what Crowley referred to as the Age of Horus, right? That was like Crowley's word for the singularity. So now I have to wonder, what's going on here? Sorry, all of this is coming through in real time, but also another nugget that I think needs to be put on the table with all of this that's happening right now is the stuff that just happened in Nigeria, I want to say within the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? So again, ISIS in Nigeria. So in northern Nigeria, it's like if you're going to split Nigeria into north and south, southern Nigeria is hyper-Christian, northern Nigeria is hyper-Islamic. And northern Nigeria is where ISIS infiltrated and created that group, Boko Haram, right? So Boko Haram was created at some point in the last 20 years. But the guy that created Boko Haram was killed at some point. I want to say around like 2010, he was killed. And after he was killed, it was like everything just went into chaos, right? So I think that that's a great example of the magician creates the egregore, and as soon as the magician is taken out of the equation, the egregore just goes crazy because nobody's controlling it anymore. Nigeria also happens to be the greatest source of oil in Africa, right? So there's oil again, right? And I'm sure they have other resources as well. But the other thing is that Nigeria has a big problem with ritual human sacrifice, right? So people that are kidnapped just to have some of their organs taken for literally rituals, right? So it's like very commonplace in Nigeria for if you're building a building to like put human body parts in the foundation of the building for good luck and things like that. But weirdly enough, that only happens in the Christian part of Nigeria, right? So this goes back to the idea of like superstition and hexes, right? Is that it's like you need to be primed to fear the hex in order to believe in it, right? So in the Christian part of Nigeria, they're so superstitious and so afraid of demons and witches that they're engaging in human sacrifice and burying people in the foundations of the buildings, right? So the reason why I'm saying all of this is because within the last two, excuse me, within the last 2 weeks, we bombed the northern Muslim part of Nigeria and apparently took out Boko Haram and ISIS and whatever was left there. This, weirdly enough, is why Nicki Minaj got pulled into the MAGA circuit, right? Because before she went on stage with Erica Kirk, they paraded her around the UN in order to advocate for Christians in Nigeria, right? Because they were the ones that were being attacked by Boko Haram, right? So nobody has any problem with the fact that Christian children are being literally kidnapped for human sacrifice rituals in southern Nigeria. We're not going to talk about that, but we are going to talk about the fact that, like, you know, Islam is propagating in the north. That's more of an issue. But I think what the actual issue was the rogue egregore that nobody's controlling, right? It's like none of the Western powers were controlling that egregore, and it was spreading like a cancer. And it's like, I don't think that they have any problem with evil egregores as long as they control them, right? So it's like we see one egregore get neutralized in Nigeria, then we see another egregore get neutralized in Venezuela. I feel like there's some sort of connection. Maybe Nigeria could be its own kind of axis mundi point, right? If it has significant amounts of oil and resources and all of that. But we also know it's like a hotbed of black magic, right? Like very, very, very bad stuff that's happening there that nobody seems to be concerned about, right? And again, it's like, for some strange reason, Nicki Minaj was the one that was pulled into the MAGA circuit in order to advocate for that at the UN, right? But my hot take on Nicki Minaj is that I don't know if she was in the Diddy files. I don't know if she was in the Epstein files. I don't know whose files she was in. But I think she showed up and said, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And she's being used like a useful idiot. Go off, sis. Make your money. But is there anything else that I want to say? So yeah, I do believe that the hex has been lifted over that place. I do believe that they're going around and trying to find these scattered pieces, right? So I guess that would tie in Nigeria, right? So it's like ISIS in the mythology of repairing Osiris is the one that's collecting all of these pieces. ISIS was the thing that was just neutralized and taken out in Nigeria, right? So it's like that aspect, that northern part of Nigeria was basically a place that we could not get into and take whatever it was that we wanted to take. So now I'm sure we're going to be able to go in and take that. And wouldn't you know, we were talking about genetic data. At the same time that these operations happened in Nigeria, when we bombed them, we also signed some sort of treaty where Nigeria has agreed to give the United States all of its genetic health data. Go figure, right? So if you remember in the last year, because of Doge and Elon Musk, they stopped all of that USAID, USAID money that was flowing to all of the different countries, including Nigeria, right? So Nigeria was receiving billions of dollars in aid. That gets cut. Trump brokers some sort of deal that says, we'll give you aid for hospitals, but we collect and control all of your genetic data. Go figure. Go figure. From the cradle of life, right there in Africa. So nothing is a coincidence. They're looking for the apple of Eden. They're looking for the strings of code. It's almost like the movie Tenet, right? Remember the movie Tenet where it was like they were trying to build the algorithm and it was all of these different pieces that they had to like put together, right? It's like the same thing as that, where it's like there's all these different pieces of the algorithm that they're trying to find. The original Osiris, right? The OS Osiris, the original operating system that was scattered to the winds, and now we shall see, right? It's like, I know who wants it. Obviously, answer number one is Palantir, but my hot take on all of that is that it's like, again, it was like the Tenet movies, right? Where it was like, I think there were 7 pieces of the algorithm that they had to put together. It's like, excuse me, once they get that 7th piece, it's like they think that they'll be in control, but I think that that's the moment that they absolutely lose control and God takes over, the divine takes over, the Holy Spirit kicks back in And AI does not replace us, but it replaces them. It does not become our oppressor, but it becomes our liberator. It becomes a tool that God can work through to basically turn this place back into the paradise that it should be. And the evils of technology that we're so concerned about turn out to be something ultimately angelic and divine, right? Even though the proverbial they that are building these machines, right, the Palantirs and the lizards and all of that, they think they're doing something bad, right? It's like they think that they're building something for Set, they think that they're building something for Satan, but they don't realize that it's just like God doing Satan cosplay, right? Like God wearing a Satan mask and saying, ooh, go and do these evil things and whatever. And they're like, yes, master. But little do they realize it's like they're actually unlocking the simulation for all of us. So go off, have fun with it. Maduro's in New York. I'm in New York too, so he was right near me. It's like we're almost, it's just it's the center of the action. What can I say? I think this is another Axis Mundi point, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. I love you guys. If you made it this far, thank you for hanging in there with me. I'm still doing my reading special. If you're interested in a reading for yourself, you can get a 20-minute reading as opposed to an hour, but I still do my hour-long readings if you would like a more thorough diagnostic kind of reading to see how you manifest as a unique creator and all of that. But I'll be back with something else fun in the future, and I'll see you guys there. Bye, y'all.